Excuse me, that's my seat.
I don't think so.
It was supposed to be a routine flight. Nothing more than the hum of engines, the shuffle of feet across the jet bridge, and the usual chorus of rolling suitcases bumping along the floor. Passengers filed in one by one, eager to settle into their seats, sip a quick drink and let the hours pass in quiet transit. But within this ordinary scene, a moment was about to unfold that would leave every witness stunned. A moment that would echo long after the seatbelts clicked and the plane reached cruising altitude. One confrontation, one clash of pride against patience, would transform a simple journey into a story spoken in whispers across airports for years to come. One woman, Victoria Hale, convinced the world owed her more than the rest, slipped into a seat that was not hers. One man, Derrick Lawson, calm, deliberate, unshakable, approached with nothing but a boarding pass in his hand. She thought he was just another passenger, a face to dismiss, someone to wave away with the arrogance of entitlement. But what she didn't know was that the man she sought to humiliate held a truth powerful enough to silence an entire cabin in seconds. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. This is the story of Derrick Lawson, the man Victoria Hale thought she could humiliate, until she discovered the truth. Derrick Lawson didn't look like a man who commanded an empire, and that was exactly how he wanted it. There was no entourage walking ahead of him, no flashing cameras announcing his arrival. Instead, he blended seamlessly with the rest of the crowd, another traveler shuffling forward with his boarding pass in hand. To the casual observer, he was nothing more than a man in a tailored suit carrying a slim briefcase, a quiet figure who preferred observation over spectacle. And yet, behind that calm exterior lived the reality of someone who had built one of the largest airlines in the nation, AeroGlobal Airways, from the ground up. The company's success, its reputation, and the experience of millions of passengers every single year were the results of choices he made, risks he took, and principles he never compromised on. For Derrick, flying wasn't just about getting from one place to another. It was about staying connected to the people who trusted his airline with their lives. While other executives chose private jets and luxury charters, he often boarded the same flights his customers did. He wanted to know the feeling of cramped aisles, the sound of impatient passengers, the taste of the coffee served at 30,000 feet. To him, leadership meant proximity, and no title, no matter how high, should ever excuse someone from experiencing what their people experienced. But even as he moved quietly down that jet bridge, determined to keep himself grounded, he had no idea that his humility would be tested in a way that neither he nor anyone else on that flight could have anticipated. Victoria Hale lived in a world where entitlement was not only expected, but demanded. She was in her mid-40s, a woman who carried herself with the air of someone who believed the universe bent to her desires. Dressed head to toe in designer labels, each accessory carefully chosen to scream wealth and authority, she carried herself with a posture that dared anyone to question her. Her voice was sharp, deliberate, the kind that could cut through a crowd without effort. She wasn't simply used to being noticed, she had built her entire life around the assumption that she would be. And more than that, she was used to being obeyed. Every room she entered bent ever so slightly under the weight of her demands, and this aircraft in her mind would be no exception. That morning when she stepped onto the plane, she spotted something that ignited her sense of privilege almost instantly. A first-class seat near the front, more spacious, more visible, more symbolic of the importance she believed she carried, called out to her. Without hesitation, without even pausing to check whether it belonged to her, she lowered herself into the leather cushion as if it were a throne waiting to be claimed. To Victoria, seats were not assigned. They were taken, secured by the strength of her confidence and her refusal to hear the word no. She convinced herself she belonged there, not by right or by ticket, but simply because she had decided it was hers. What she did not know, what she could not possibly have predicted, was that this particular seat was not ordinary. This wasn't just another reserved chair in first class. It was the assigned seat of Derrick Lawson, the man she assumed was just another face in the crowd. A man carrying a simple boarding pass, moving without fanfare, but who held far more authority than she could ever imagine. And when he approached, when his quiet presence stood before her and his boarding pass revealed the truth, the stage was set for a confrontation that would ripple through the cabin and etch itself into the memory of every witness who saw it unfold. When Derrick Lawson reached his assigned first-class seat, his movements remained calm, deliberate, unshaken. He carried no trace of frustration, no visible sign of anger. In his hand, his boarding pass confirmed what he already knew. Seat 2A was his, and yet there sat Victoria Hale, already nestled into the wide leather cushion as though it had been placed there for her alone. He paused for a moment, his eyes steady, his breathing even, double-checking the printed ticket to eliminate any possibility of mistake. But there was none. The ticket was clear. That was his seat. Around them, other passengers began to notice. What started as the ordinary shuffle of boarding quickly gave way to a quiet, shifting tension. Conversations hushed. Glances darted toward the scene unfolding in row 2. It was clear to everyone on board that something was about to happen. Clara Ramirez, a flight attendant known for her calm professionalism, noticed the disruption almost immediately. She approached with measured steps, her expression warm but firm, the kind of demeanor that reassured passengers in moments of turbulence, both literal and social. Leaning slightly toward Victoria, she politely explained that the seat had already been assigned and that there appeared to be a mistake. Her voice carried patience, but it also carried authority, the kind expected from a crew member trained to handle disputes at 30,000 feet. For most passengers, this gentle intervention would have been enough. But Victoria Hale was not most passengers. She dismissed Clara's words with a flick of her hand, her chin tilting upward in defiance, her tone dripping with arrogance as she declared she would be staying exactly where she was. To Victoria, Derrick Lawson was just another man, another faceless passenger. Someone who could be brushed aside with the same ease she had brushed aside countless others in her life. But the passengers who watched closely noticed something different in Derrick. It wasn't aggression, it wasn't outrage, but rather a quiet authority that seemed to radiate from him. A steadiness that suggested he was not a man easily moved or silenced. Though Victoria believed she could win the standoff through sheer willpower and stubbornness, she had unknowingly chosen a battle with someone whose very presence was a contradiction to her entitlement. And as the tension thickened, it became clear that this confrontation would not simply be ignored or brushed aside. The flight had barely begun, and already the stage was set for a clash that no one on that plane would soon forget. Clara Ramirez, committed to professionalism, tried everything she could to de-escalate the situation. She leaned down beside Victoria Hale, her voice calm, her words carefully chosen, offering alternatives with the patience of someone who had resolved dozens of conflicts in the skies before. She suggested other seats, reminded Victoria of airline policy, and even offered to assist her in contacting the gate staff if she felt there had been a mistake. But Victoria was unmoved. Instead of softening, she grew louder, her words sharp and cutting, her insistence echoing through the cabin. She claimed she had every right to stay, that she had paid enough for her ticket to sit wherever she pleased, that no one, not even the airline staff, could tell her otherwise. The louder she spoke, the more her entitlement exposed itself, drawing stares from passengers who had once tried to remain uninvolved, but were now captivated by the unfolding scene. All around, passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. What had started as a quiet dispute had transformed into a spectacle. Some passengers lowered their heads, hoping the matter would resolve quickly, while others leaned forward, drawn into the drama. A handful reached for their phones, recording discreetly from the corners of the cabin, aware that they were capturing a moment that carried the weight of confrontation, pride, and humiliation. Victoria sneered as she spoke, her voice dripping with condescension, dismissing Derrick Lawson as if he were beneath her. Her words carried the unmistakable tone of someone who believed power came from dominance alone, and yet, the more she insisted, the more passengers began to see her behavior as a reflection of entitlement rather than strength. Through it all, Derrick Lawson remained silent. He did not raise his voice, nor did he attempt to argue. He simply stood in the aisle, boarding pass in hand, his posture tall, his expression calm, his presence steady. The contrast between his quiet authority and Victoria's escalating arrogance only heightened the tension. Where she grew louder, he grew quieter. Where she demanded, he waited. And in that silence was something far more unnerving than words could have been. It was the silence of a man who did not need to prove himself through confrontation, a man who understood the weight of patience. For those watching, it became clear, Derrick's silence was not weakness, it was restraint. And restraint in that moment was far more powerful than anything Victoria Hale had to offer. By now, the disruption could no longer be brushed aside. The boarding process had slowed, the murmurs of uneasy passengers had grown louder, and Clara Ramirez knew she needed assistance. With a discreet call, she requested support, and moments later, Samuel O'Neill, the head flight attendant, arrived. Samuel was known among his crew for his ability to cut through chaos with composure. His presence carried authority, and even before he spoke, passengers sensed the dynamic in the cabin was about to shift. Stepping forward, Samuel addressed Victoria Hale with the practiced calm of someone who had managed countless disputes at 30,000 feet. He requested, politely but firmly, that she present her boarding pass. For a moment the tension thickened. Victoria hesitated, her posture stiff, her lips pressing into a thin line. But with dozens of eyes watching, she had no choice. Slowly, she produced the pass, placing it into Samuel's waiting hand. The truth was immediate, undeniable, and written plainly on the slip of paper. The seat was not hers. It never had been. Her actual assignment lay further back in the cabin, away from the luxury of the front row she had claimed. Samuel, professional as ever, explained this clearly, and offered to escort her to the correct location. Most passengers, faced with such evidence, would have complied, even if begrudgingly. But Victoria Hale was not most passengers. Instead of yielding, she doubled down, her voice rising, her tone sharpening with the weight of self-righteousness. She declared that she would not move, that she had every right to remain where she was. She threatened to lodge a complaint with the airline, to sue, to make an example of what she called mistreatment. Her words carried the force of arrogance, each syllable designed to intimidate and overwhelm, as if sheer insistence could rewrite the truth. The passengers leaned in further, caught between disbelief and fascination. They could hardly comprehend how Victoria's defiance persisted in the face of such clarity. Yet for her, this wasn't about facts. It was about control, about refusing to back down, about protecting an image of power she could not afford to lose. She waved her hand as if dismissing Samuel's explanation, insisting that she would have people at the top deal with the matter personally. Her voice rang out with entitlement, each word echoing through the cabin as though she were delivering a command instead of a plea. But what Victoria could not have known was that the man standing silently in front of her, the man she had disregarded as insignificant, was the very top she was threatening. Derrick Lawson, founder and CEO of AeroGlobal Airways, listened without reaction, his silence weighing heavier than any retort. And in that silence, the balance of power had already shifted, though Victoria had yet to realize it. For what felt like an eternity, Derrick Lawson had remained silent. He had endured Victoria Hale's arrogance, Clara Ramirez's attempts at mediation, and Samuel O'Neill's professionalism as the confrontation stretched on. But then, at last, he spoke. His voice was steady, deliberate, and carried the kind of quiet authority that instantly cut through the cabin's noise. He introduced himself not as a faceless passenger, not as someone easily dismissed, but as Derrick Lawson, CEO and founder of AeroGlobal Airways. The words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, there was disbelief. Passengers blinked, glancing at one another, as though waiting for a sign that they had heard correctly. Could it be true? The man who had stood in silence, refusing to argue, refusing to escalate, was in fact the very person who built the airline from the ground up. But Derrick didn't leave his revelation to doubt. With the same calmness he had carried all along, he reached into his briefcase and produced official identification. Not just a boarding pass, not just a corporate card, but the kind of credentials that carried weight, documents that confirmed his role, his authority, and his position at the very top of AeroGlobal Airways. Samuel O'Neill, holding the papers for verification, nodded in confirmation. And in that moment, disbelief gave way to stunned silence. The cabin, once filled with whispers and shifting bodies, grew still. The truth was undeniable. The man Victoria Hale had mocked, belittled, and dismissed was not simply entitled to the seat she occupied. He owned the airline that carried her across the sky. The shift in energy was instantaneous, almost electric. Passengers who had once sat in discomfort now leaned forward in their seats, eyes locked not on Derrick Lawson, but on Victoria Hale. Every ounce of her entitlement, every arrogant word she had thrown, now echoed back at her with crushing weight. The very foundation of her defiance had collapsed, and all that remained was the undeniable truth of who she had challenged. Some passengers struggled to hide their smirks, others exchanged knowing glances, while a few shook their heads in disbelief. Victoria, who had commanded the cabin with her arrogance, now found herself under the gaze of an entire plane, waiting, watching, anticipating her reaction. And in that suspended silence, the balance of power had shifted entirely. Derrick had spoken only a few words, but they were enough to rewrite the story of that flight forever. Victoria Hale's confidence, once displayed so boldly, crumbled in an instant. The authority she thought she commanded evaporated the moment Derrick Lawson revealed his identity, and the contrast between who she believed she was and who he truly was left her exposed. She had wagered everything on arrogance, believing her entitlement could bend rules to her will, but now the weight of reality pressed down with undeniable force. Samuel O'Neill, the head flight attendant who had managed the confrontation with composure, stepped forward once more. His tone remained professional, but his words carried finality. He informed Victoria that she would need to move immediately, that her presence in the seat was no longer a matter of dispute but of compliance. And though she tried to keep her face composed, the tremor in her movements betrayed the truth. Her battle was over, and she had lost. The passengers, who had watched in mounting tension, reacted almost in unison. Applause broke out from the rows behind, not thunderous, but steady, growing with each clap. A few passengers cheered quietly, while others shook their heads with satisfaction. Phones remained raised, recording every detail of her downfall. What had begun as whispered commentary had transformed into collective judgment, and the evidence of her arrogance was now documented on dozens of screens. Cameras captured every second as Victoria Hale, once so certain of her superiority, gathered her belongings with stiff, jerking motions. Each item she stuffed into her designer bag seemed to echo the collapse of the image she had tried so desperately to maintain. Then came the walk of shame. With Samuel O'Neill standing by, and Clara Ramirez watching carefully, Victoria was forced to rise from the seat she had claimed as her throne. The aisle stretched before her like a gauntlet, lined with passengers whose eyes followed her every step. She squeezed past legs and knees, her designer outfit doing nothing to shield her from the sting of humiliation. Each step toward the back of the plane felt heavier than the last, a reminder that entitlement had no place against truth. And as she finally slid into a narrow economy seat, stripped of the comfort and status she believed she deserved, the humiliation was complete. Victoria Hale's arrogance had collided with reality, and in front of a plane full of witnesses, she had lost everything she thought made her powerful. The rest of the flight carried on in quiet normalcy, but for those who had witnessed the confrontation, nothing about it felt ordinary. Conversations lingered in hushed tones. Passengers replayed the moment in their minds, and some even reviewed the footage they had captured, knowing they had recorded a story that would ripple far beyond that cabin. Yet the heart of the story was not about the seat itself. It was about the clash between two very different approaches to life. One grounded in humility, patience, and quiet strength, the other steeped in arrogance, entitlement, and disregard for others. Derrick Lawson never needed to raise his voice, never needed to command the attention of the cabin with force. His dignity spoke louder than words. In contrast, Victoria Hale's downfall came not from others but from her own actions. The contrast could not have been sharper. Humility versus pride, respect versus disrespect. For Derrick Lawson, the flight was simply another journey, a reminder of why he continued to fly among his passengers rather than apart from them. For Victoria Hale, it became a public reckoning, a demonstration of how quickly the image of power collapses when it has no foundation. The lesson etched itself deeply into the minds of everyone present. Respect costs nothing, but arrogance can cost everything. And long after the plane landed, that message remained. Passengers walked away with more than luggage. They walked away with a story that would be retold countless times, a story that revealed the strength of character and the emptiness of entitlement. It was no longer just an incident, it was a symbol, one that captured the timeless truth that real authority is shown not through domination, but through self-control. So let me leave you with this. If you were in Derrick Lawson's shoes that day, standing before Victoria Hale as she refused to move, how would you have handled it? Would you have stayed silent like him or spoken up sooner? Share your thoughts with us in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. This was the story of Derrick Lawson, Victoria Hale, and the flight that reminded everyone aboard of the unshakable power of humility.